And I've become quite passionate about this area. I've probably been researching and looking at it for probably about 6 or 7 years now, including doing some academic research, writing a book, and I've got another book on the pipeline. So definitely been a bit of a passion. So what I'm going to share with you today really is a model of the components are in the show bag, so you don't need to worry about writing things down. And I'm just going to give you just a bit of buzzwords. You know, people are, all saying we need resilience, whether it's post-bushfire, when communities are devastated, whether it's resilience in parenting, I need my kids to toughen up, whether it's actually resilience in climate, climate change issues. Resilience is this sort of word that people have sort of hung on to. And so what I want to do first up is to really put in context when we're talking about resilience at work, what really are we talking about? Because I think it's a bit different from resilience in communities. Clearly there's parallels, but we're talking about different things. And so if we think about the key drivers that we're seeing at the moment, and it doesn't matter whether you are, working in corporate or whether you're in government or whether you're not for profit, there are some things that are happening in our workplaces that suddenly spell to us that we need to be doing things differently and we need resilience. And I think the first one is there's no doubt that we're seeing an imbalance now between what we're having to do and what we can actually do it with. So whether it's staff, whether it's budgets, who here has had an increase in staff? Oh, well, great, that's unusual. Who here has had an increase in budget? Okay, who's had a decrease in staff and still having to do the same amount of things? So I think what we're seeing then is that as budgets and staff get cut, what we're seeing is that people are having to do more with less. So the expectations quite often aren't changing or they're increasing. And so one of the reasons why people are saying resilience is really about stress. Okay, we've got a lot of work pressures on the go. And then added to this, it seems that there's a lot of complexity happening out there that didn't used to be there. And just think about your normal life, when you're I've been renewing insurance today. Now, it's a nightmare, working out all the things and reading all the documentations. And so I think we can translate that into work in that everything we do now seems to be more complex. We need our social media plan, our risk management, etc., etc. And there's a lot of change going on. So again, it doesn't matter what sector you're in. I spoke last week at the South Australian Council of Social Services Forum. Huge changes in the not-for-profit with grants disappearing that mean whole services have to realign. In the government, constant merging of departments, restructuring going on. So again, we've not only got pressure, but it seems that there's a lot more uncertainty and change. And this is the new normal. We can't say we've got to manage through this change because change and uncertainty seems to be the new normal. And uncertainty, a classic there would be not knowing if your contract's going to be renewed or those of your colleagues are going to be renewed. And again, a classic from last week was, it was 9 months almost of uncertainty around whether they will get the grants. It's not like it's a week, it becomes 2 weeks, 3 months, and so on. And so you're trying to keep people motivated. And lastly, I don't know about you, but there seems to be a shift in what people expect of you when you do. Is anyone in a front-line sort of role, where you're dealing with the public, either on the phone or nobody? Yeah, a few people at the back. Yeah. So it doesn't matter whether you are serving internal customers or whether you're serving external customers. I think the expectations are increasing, and sometimes the behaviour is also tricky. So you talk with people on call centres or in front of counters, maybe in emergency services, for example. People are also having to deal with managing people's expectations and sometimes bad behaviour. And so we sort of started to hear these things about resilience, and quite often we think about resilience as being well-being. But I think that when we're talking about resilience at work, we're actually talking about two things. We're talking about how do we still perform, because we're in a job after all, okay, this isn't a social club. How do we still perform but how do we do it in a way that we stay well? Because I think it's very easy to put people under pressure and they perform, but unless there's a recovery or a downtime, then what we're on the road to, aren't we? And so when we're talking about resilience, when I'm talking about resilience, that's what I'm talking about. When we're in our job, how do we manage to do what we need to do effectively? Because otherwise we're not delivering. But how do we do it in a way that we actually preserve our psychological and physical well-being, so keep ourselves well? And if we're in a leadership position, how do we actually do that within our team? And we've also been doing some really interesting research on what makes a resilient team, and I won't have time to explore that today, but clearly we need to invest not only in ourselves but also the climate we develop in the team. What are the things that we need to set up so that the team is best prepared as well? So you won't be able to read that terribly well, but don't worry, because you've got a nice big handout with this particular model on. So this is a model that I developed with Peter Winwood, who was at uni. So I think of this as a little bit like a toolkit. If you invest in each of these components, and I'm going to explain a little bit about them in a moment, if you invest in each of these components, what you're doing is you're positioning yourself the best way you can to be resilient, so to keep your performance up and keep your well-being up. Now, I think a lot of the misnomers in resilience is that resilience is a trait. It's one of those aspects that we're born with. It's an aspect of our personality. But I have to tell you that's not the case. Any one of you could find yourself in a mess in the wrong circumstance, as could I. And I know that for a fact because I see amazing people in the workplace in trouble. And so we need to think about resilience not as one of these things that's an aspect of our personality that we have all the time. We need to think about resilience as a state. So in other words, how you are thinking and feeling and responding to the challenges that are happening with you. So it might be that you might be travelling really well, but then you might have a colleague from hell, or a boss from hell, or a job from hell, or any variations of the above. As things shift around us, we need to shift accordingly with our toolkit. Okay, so it's not fixed. It changes all the time. And what that means is it needs constant maintenance. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take you through each of the components of the model and give you a flavour. And what you need to do is to self-assess in your mind, is that something I do well? If I do, how do I maintain it? Because when you're busy, just maintaining something is hard work, as you'll see. If you think that's something I'm not doing, then you need to say, what might I do about that? Unfortunately, sometimes there might not be anything you can do. So the philosophy or the framework of the moral is, if you can't invest in that piece, you have to invest even more in the other pieces just to get yourself over the line. Okay, so it's very much a toolkit of 7 strategies. So let's have a look. So the first one we know is that we will be far more resilient if our job aligns with our values and our strengths. So if you, for example, are a very social person, very good with relationship building, suddenly you're stuck on data entry. If you're a technical expert, suddenly you're a manager, you're a leader. You're working outside of your strengths. So as soon as you start to look outside of your strengths, then clearly that starts to impact on resilience. But even more problematic is when things are outside of what you believe in. So I see lots of people these days who say to me, the integrity is not there in my work anymore. So I'm a teacher who's concerned with bureaucracy or paperwork or complaints when I came for passion for students. Whether I'm an environmental scientist. Is anyone here from junior or anywhere? Where I'm passionate about my project, and suddenly that project's cut, or the professionalism that I can do. If I'm actually a nurse who has a belief in this particular model of care and I've been compromised in that through budgets. So what we're finding is that alignment with values is absolutely so important. But quite often we can't have a choice to move out. It might even be that the alignment with values is with people in our team or people who are our managers. But what we do know is that if you're working in a situation where there is misalignment, it's not sustainable longer term. We can invest in these other things, but ideally we need to look at how do we exit that, or how do we try to move to something that's more compatible. And people these days do leave because the values are incompatible. So really important one. And the other part of authenticity is, are we very good at regulating your emotions? So what we know is that if we lose it a lot, whether we're tearful or anger, that actually is not good resilience. Not only, it might be good for us in terms of a release, but what it does is it has an impact on relationships, particularly if you're a manager. And I can remember, I do a lot of coaching work. I can remember being asked to coach a guy who was in line to be the CEO, and they sent him to Harvard and everything, but they weren't going to let him have that role until he actually sorted out his angry outbursts. And he wouldn't have them very often, but when he had them, they were major, and everyone would go to ground for 3 months. So emotional regulation is a really important part. So again, if you're thinking, and you can see this is about your current state, your current job. So if you were to think now, how well is my job aligned with my strengths, with my values? Those are things that will tell you that that's a good thing in terms of the resilience. Closely related to that is, and this is almost like an outcome rather than an input, is we actually know if our job has a sense of purpose and we feel connected to the organisation, we will be more resilient. So this is why people who call their job a vocation are able to put up with a lot more, because they can connect what they do to the why. So this lady here, I'll pick on her because she shared with me earlier on that she works in Wakefield Orthopaedics. Now you could be, and I don't know what your role is because you didn't tell me, but you could be someone doing admissions, and you consider that a task and an administrative thing. Or you could have your job connected to why you're there, which is saving patients, creating well-being, etc. It makes a huge difference if you feel that what you're doing adds value and is worthwhile. And I was speaking to someone in a government department recently who was totally disengaged, very talented, but totally disengaged. And a lot of it was because they couldn't connect what they were doing to anything that actually had any value in the end to what that government department was doing. And it's why, people do terrible jobs like, can work in things like child protection and all those things because they can connect to the why. But also, we also know that if we feel connected to our organisation, and by connected usually means we feel connected to our immediate team, we will hang in a lot longer. And someone was telling me the other day that they had a very tight team, 2 members of the team left, so they all left. Because the job was the team, the job was those relationships. Now, of course, there are things we can change. If I was to come to your team, would I feel welcomed? Would I feel connected? Would I feel engaged? Or would I, sort of be ignored? And that does happen. So how do you, the more you get, and it's a bit like why after disasters, people pull together, and that sense of community is really important. So a sense of community with who you work with is really, really helpful in terms of resilience. Now, of course, probably the hardest one to shift is how we think when things go wrong. So are you someone who catastrophizes? My father, I was on the phone to him yesterday. He's just had surgery for bladder cancer. It was all very unexpected. And we were talking about someone else, and he says, "Oh, well, they're glass half full. I'm always a glass, they're glass half empty. I'm glass half full." And I thought, absolutely, So even in this sort of, post-recovery, where he, it was pretty serious, he still has a great sense of optimism and belief that, things will be okay. So is that you, or do you tend to go straight to catastrophizing, worst case scenario? So resilient people, when things go wrong, tend to go into solution. And they tend to look at what can I do, and they let go of the rest of it. So they don't take on the that should have happened, this should have happened, that's sort of what we can sometimes call a victim mentality. They look at, okay, what can I do and how do I do it and how do I get on with it. And of course in a leadership and in a team situation, it's really critical. People don't get stuck in the isn't it awful we've had a restructure, isn't it awful that we've lost our new manager and we've now got, we don't know what's going on. So there's two things about this. So are you a person who goes into solution when things go wrong? And are you someone who has a general level of positivity and optimism? Because we also know that's a bit self-fulfilling as well, because it affects our relationships with others. If we're optimistic, if we're positive, it sort of reciprocates. Again, both of those things you can change. You can demonstrate more positivity in the language you use and the way you look. You can work on shifting. Sometimes it's a bit of a hard, a long road to do that, but we can shift the way we frame things and the way we see things. And we can nurture that within our teams. Now, unfortunately, in work, we still need to do stress management 101, okay? Because you can't be resilient at work unless you're actually managing what you've got to do. Now, I could spend, 3 hours just talking about what that might be, but in basic ways, it involves managing your time. Okay, so are you best prioritising, managing the time you've got? The second one probably is, do I engage in what we would call self-care? Do I have outlets outside of work? Do I take breaks? Do I actually make sure that I do all the things that actually are helping my health? And the third one is, am I maintaining a reasonable work-life balance? And by that we simply mean, are you making sure there's boundaries that are stopping work actually affecting your life? And those boundaries will be different. For everyone, the boundaries around what becomes the domination of work is different. So again, if you are good at this, then that's another piece in your toolkit that's actually helping in terms of your resilience. Interacting cooperatively. We've found that resilient people are quite happy to ask for help. And they're also very happy to give it. And both is important. So some of you might be very good at giving help, but you're pretty self-sufficient, or maybe too self-sufficient for your own good sometimes in terms of asking for it. And we need to do both. And you think about it, if you're someone who helps everyone, but you say, oh no, I'm okay when you're offered, what you're actually doing is you're saying, well, I don't need help. So mutual support in a team is really important, and the more that's embedded, and that everyone automatically does it, the better it actually is in terms of the resilience. So giving support, do you do that? Ask for support, do you ask for it when you need it? And lastly, in this area, do you actively ask for feedback, or don't you? Because the only way we can adapt and change, and adaptability is a big part of resilience, is to find out how we're going. And to ask, am I on track? But to do it in a confident way, so to act from a basis of confidence, or confidently saying, well, I think I've done that okay, can I just check in with you? Rather than then, I don't know what I'm doing, sort of thing. And it's amazing, how when we don't ask and we assume, we always assume the worst, So if you haven't spoken to me today, I'm not thinking, oh, you're distracted today. I'm making an assumption that you've got an issue with me at the moment. What have I done to upset you? So assumptions always tend to go to negative. And again, I've got lots of lovely case studies. If we had more time, I could talk to you about people's situations where simply asking for some feedback and validating something is so important in terms of anxiety. So self-assess on this, and we do actually have a scale, as a resilience at work scale, where you can actually do a proper assessment using these components. You probably don't like this, but what we eat and our exercise is really important. So, one of the easy ways to appreciate this is the last time you were sick or had an injury, and think about how your resilience was affected. So the physical part is all about putting in the energy that you expect to get out of your body. So if we're actually, eating donuts all afternoon and we're not doing any exercise and we're not getting enough sleep, then we're actually doing ourselves a disservice. So the physical health components are still really important. So we need to actually be making sure that we are doing the right things by our bodies. And as I said, if you are ill and you're sick, then you do need to invest in more of the other aspects of the model, like support and like asking for support and the way we think about things, because your physical health is compromised. So all of these things, there are sometimes when we can't invest in that part because of something. So physical health is a good example. So we need to invest in the other aspects of the model. Networks. All right. If you were to think about your life and you were to think about what relationships do I need to support me in my work and at home, what would you come up with? Do you need someone who gives you perspective? Do you need someone that you can debrief with and just, safely talk about what's going on? Do you have someone who gives you technical support, career advice? Do you have someone who helps with the kids, pick up the kids, do the gardening, help with the housework, whatever it will be? All of us as working people need a network of support that we tap into. And so resilience in that sense is thinking about who do I need in my support network and how do I nurture that network and maintain it? Because a network needs effort and reciprocation. So I can't expect you to be the person who every time I'm upset we have coffee and I dump. Won't be long before you won't want to have a coffee with me because I just, here you leave feeling miserable. But if that's a reciprocation where I also do that for you, well then actually that's a very positive part of a network. And what that network will look like will be different for everyone. And where this goes wrong is quite often people don't recognise the importance of people until they're gone. So you might have one person who you debrief with, you have a laugh with, you socialise with, you get emotional support for. Suddenly they move away or something happens, and it's amazing the gap that can be. So it's also about not being over-reliant on one or two people and having enough of a support network. And of course this in communities is absolutely really, really critical. So we've been working with farming communities recently, so that rural support. Because again, farmers, are very self-sufficient, aren't they? And so actually making sure that people are willing to ask for help and have those networks is really important. So what have I done then? So I've given you a very broadly, say you've got these in your handouts, a model of 7 components that you actually need to invest in. And what that will look like will be quite different in everyone's circumstance. So asking for help might be different. Asking for feedback might be different, because who are you asking feedback from and why? And perhaps you can't ask for feedback within your organisation because it's not safe, so you need to say, how do I validate externally? What does values alignment look like? What does strengths alignment look like? What does the thinking look like in the team? Do people tend to get, emotionally charged and negative, or do they actually go solution focused? So what you might need to focus on will vary according to your situation, according to your team's situation. But we've used this model in lots and lots of different occupations, and it certainly resonates, whether you're a fireman, a lawyer, a volunteer, admin support. It's certainly a useful graphic. So what I suggest is that you not only think about that in terms of your own resilience and what your action plans would be, but to share the model more broadly so that you can start to open conversations around how do we actually best support ourselves to be resilient in the circumstances we have. And as I said, we're also working on a team model at the moment around what do we need to invest in terms of our team. And I think it's not only about identifying that in the beginning and setting some actions, but periodically reviewing how you're tracking, because it changes. As I said, you might be tracking really well, and something happens, you've got to readjust. And then you might track a well again, and then something else happens. So it's constantly thinking about what is it at the moment that I need to invest in that's going to work for me. So I think I've got time for a couple of questions, and I'm happy to stay back for a little while after if anyone's got anything you don't want to ask me in a public forum. But if anyone got any comments or questions?
I've just got a question about how you would suggest in terms of, I guess, factoring in things external from work impacting on that resilience.
Yes. So I think there are a couple, I might just go back to the model to explain that.
Yeah.
So I think the factors that in particular will actually affect both sides. The mastering stress in particular, we have to be mindful that we've got stress at work, but we will also have pressures at home. So when we're talking about mastering stress, it might be that we've got some good techniques for managing work, but it's home that's actually tipping us over the edge. And we can't be two people, we're one person. So I think it's about also recognising what support networks you need to put in place at home, and how you actually develop strategies for that. Because that also will fairly often affect our perspective. A classic might be that you might be someone at work where nothing bothers you, but the slightest little thing that goes wrong with family members, and you go off. You know, so it's sometimes about translating some of that skill set that we do so well in our professional life to our lives as parents or children, you know, in terms of if it's our own parents. Yeah, so yes, absolutely. Even though this model is around work, and particularly the aspects around living authentically and fun, you calling it very much around the job match, we have to be mindful that it's about everything. And a classic example with the networks one, which is the S7, was I did a session with firefighters, and one of the women said that the most crucial part of the network for her was during fire season making sure there was someone who was looking after the kids. So she was 110% certain that was looked after. So the stress of the fire was fine because they were trained to do that, but that was a very, very critical part for her in terms of her network to be able to do her job. And as I said, that will be different for everyone.